The desert heat shimmered across the forward operating base as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stepped off the transport helicopter. Dust swirled around her boots as she shouldered her medical pack, scanning the compound that would be her home for the next 12 months. The year was 2009, and Fob Apache sat like a fortress of sand and concrete in the heart of Afghanistan's volatile Helmand province. Commander Jake Morrison watched from his office window as the new medic made her way across the landing zone. At 34, Morrison had seen 3 tours of duty and commanded Bravo Company with an iron fist. His weathered face bore the lines of a man who had lost too many good soldiers, and his gray eyes held the hardness that came from making life and death decisions daily. Santos knocked on his office door at precisely 1400 hours. Her uniform crisp despite the choking dust outside. Morrison barely looked up from his paperwork as she entered and saluted. "Staff Sergeant Santos reporting for duty, sir." Morrison's eyes traveled over the slight woman before him. At 5'4" and weighing barely 130 pounds, she looked like she belonged in a hospital back home, not in a combat zone where insurgents regularly tested their perimeter defenses. "Santos," he said, finally returning her salute with a lazy gesture. "I've read your file. Top of your class at Fort Sam Houston, commendations from your previous assignment. Impressive on paper." Santos sensed the "but" coming before he spoke it. "But this isn't a stateside medical facility. This is war. My men have been out here for 8 months, and they've developed a rhythm. They trust each other with their lives every single day." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with calculating eyes. "You don't belong here, Santos. Not because you're a woman, but because you haven't earned your place yet. My soldiers won't respect you until you prove you can keep them alive when everything goes to hell." The words stung, but Santos kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of this speech before, though never delivered with such blunt honesty. "I understand, sir. I'm here to do my job." "Your job," Morrison continued, "is to patch up my boys when they come back broken and get them ready to go out again. But understand this. If your inexperience gets one of my soldiers killed because you freeze up or make the wrong call, I'll have you transferred to the safest desk job I can find. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Morrison dismissed her with a wave, already turning his attention back to his paperwork. As Santos left his office, she could feel the weight of his skepticism following her across the compound. The next weeks fell into a brutal routine. Santos worked in the base medical facility, treating everything from heat exhaustion to shrapnel wounds from roadside bombs. The other medics gradually warmed to her professional competence, but Morrison's soldiers remained distant. They were polite but reserved, sharing the casual camaraderie that came from shared danger with everyone except her. Corporal Danny Williams, Morrison's communications specialist, summed up the general attitude one evening as Santos passed their table in the dining facility. "Nothing personal, Doc," he said quietly, using the universal military term for any medic. "But out here, trust gets built in the field. Until you've been in the shit with us, you're just another replacement." Santos nodded, understanding the logic even if it frustrated her. She had trained for exactly these conditions, but training and reality were different animals entirely. The opportunity to prove herself came sooner than anyone expected. On a sweltering Tuesday morning in July, Morrison's unit prepared for a routine patrol to the village of Nad Ali, where intelligence suggested insurgent activity had increased over the past week. The mission was straightforward: show presence, gather information, and return to base before the afternoon heat became unbearable. Santos watched from the medical facility as the convoy of 4 armored vehicles rolled out through the main gate. 22 soldiers in total, including Morrison and his key squad leaders. It was supposed to be a 6-hour mission. 12 hours later, they still hadn't returned. Second document. The first distress call crackled through the base communications center at 1847 hours, just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Santos was reviewing medical inventory when the urgent voice of Corporal Williams cut through the static. Apache Base, this is Bravo 6. We have multiple casualties, repeat, multiple casualties. Complex ambush with IED strike. Need immediate medical evacuation. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, the base commander, burst into the communications center as Williams' transmission continued. The news grew worse with each word. IED strike disabled lead vehicle. Casualties trapped inside. Taking heavy small arms and RPG fire from 3 directions. Cannot move to extraction point. Require immediate support. Santos felt her stomach clench as Williams rattled off the casualty report. 7 wounded, 3 critically. Among the critical was Commander Morrison himself, unconscious with a suspected traumatic brain injury from the blast. "Where's the quick reaction force?" Patterson demanded. The operations officer checked his board. "First platoon is 40 minutes out, sir. Second platoon is committed to the Eastern Sector patrol." Patterson's face darkened. 40 minutes was too long. In the field, minutes could mean the difference between life and death for severely wounded soldiers. Santos stepped forward. "Sir, I can be ready in 5 minutes." Patterson looked at her as if she had suggested flying to the moon. "Staff Sergeant, that unit is pinned down in a complex ambush. We're talking about combat conditions, not a field exercise." "With respect, sir, those men are bleeding out while we discuss options. I have the training and equipment to stabilize them until the QRF arrives." "Absolutely not. I'm not sending one medic into a firefight." Santos heard Williams's voice again over the radio, growing more urgent. "Apache Base, we have 1 KIA. Repeat, 1 killed in action. Critical casualties deteriorating rapidly." The words hit Santos like a physical blow. Someone had died while they argued about protocols and procedures. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, "I didn't come here to watch good soldiers die because we're afraid to take risks. I'm going with or without official permission." Patterson stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words against regulations and reality. Finally, he grabbed his radio. "Maintenance. Prep the fastest bird you have. Medical. Prep for multiple trauma casualties." Santos was already moving toward the door. "I'll need a pilot willing to fly into a hot landing zone." "You'll have Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez," Patterson called after her. "He's crazy enough to try anything once." 20 minutes later, Santos strapped herself into the co-pilot seat of a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter loaded with advanced medical equipment. Rodriguez, a veteran pilot with graying temples and steady hands, performed his pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. "Doc, I've been flying combat missions for 15 years, he said through the intercom as they lifted off. "But I've never flown solo into an active firefight to pick up casualties. You sure about this?" Santos adjusted her body armor and checked her medical kit one final time. "Those soldiers are counting on us, Chief. We can't let them down." As the helicopter raced toward the ambush site, Santos reviewed the medical procedures she might need to perform under fire. Airway management, hemorrhage control, shock treatment, all the skills she had practiced countless times, but never while bullets flew overhead. The landing zone appeared ahead as a column of black smoke rising from the burning lead vehicle. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the area like deadly fireworks, and the distinctive sound of AK-47 automatic weapons fire echoed across the desert. Rodriguez circled the area once, assessing the tactical situation. "Doc, this is as bad as it gets. Multiple shooters, limited cover, and that LZ is hot as hell. You still want to do this?" Santos looked down at the trapped soldiers. She could see figures moving behind cover, some dragging wounded comrades to safety. In the distance, muzzle flashes marked enemy positions in a rough semicircle around Morrison's unit. "Take us down, Chief." Third document. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and debris as small arms fire peppered the ground around them. Santos grabbed her medical pack and sprinted toward the nearest group of soldiers, keeping low as bullets whined overhead. Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, Morrison's senior squad leader, looked up in amazement as she dove into their defensive position behind a low concrete wall. "Doc, what the hell are you doing here?" "My job," Santos replied, already assessing the wounded soldier lying beside Torres. Private Jackson had taken shrapnel to his left leg, the metal fragments having severed his femoral artery. Blood soaked the makeshift bandage someone had applied, and Jackson's face was pale with shock. Santos immediately went to work, applying a tourniquet above the wound and establishing an IV line to combat the blood loss. Jackson's vitals were weak but stable. He would live if she could get him evacuated quickly. "Where's the commander?" she called over the sound of gunfire. Torres pointed toward the burning vehicle 50 meters away. "Lead truck with Williams and 2 others. They're trapped, and we can't get to them through this fire." Santos looked across the open ground between their position and the disabled vehicle. Enemy fire had created a deadly crossfire that made movement nearly impossible. But inside that truck, Commander Morrison and his soldiers were depending on her. "Cover me," she said, grabbing her pack. "Doc, that's suicide. Wait for the QRF." Santos was already moving. "They don't have time to wait." She sprinted across the open space in a zigzag pattern, using every piece of cover available. Bullets struck the ground around her feet, and she could hear the distinctive crack of rounds passing close to her head. 20 meters, 30, 40. She dove behind the rear of the disabled vehicle as automatic weapons fire intensified around her position. Through the smoke and dust, she could see Williams trying to drag Morrison from the driver's seat while blood ran down his own face from a head wound. "Williams, can you hear me?" The corporal turned, his expression shifting from surprise to relief. "Doc, the commander's in bad shape, unconscious since the blast. Rodriguez in the back seat has a sucking chest wound." Santos squeezed through the twisted metal of the rear door and immediately began her assessment. Morrison had obvious head trauma, with a depressed skull fracture visible above his right ear. His breathing was shallow and irregular, classic signs of severe brain injury. Private Rodriguez lay across the back seat, struggling to breathe through a punctured lung. Pink foam bubbled from his lips with each labored breath, indicating blood in his lungs. Both men were critical and needed immediate surgical intervention. Working in the confined space of the damaged vehicle, Santos stabilized Rodriguez first, sealing his chest wound and decompressing his lung with a needle thoracostomy. The procedure required delicate precision, while artillery rounds exploded nearby and small arms fire continued to rake their position. Morrison required more complex care. Santos carefully immobilized his cervical spine and established an airway, monitoring his deteriorating neurological signs. His pupils were becoming unequal, a dangerous sign indicating increased pressure inside his skull. "Williams, we need to move them now," she called. "Can you reach Torres on the radio?" Williams keyed his handset. "Torres, we need immediate extraction. Doc's got them stabilized, but they need surgery." Torres's voice crackled back through the static. "Negative. Fire's too heavy. We're pinned down." That's when Santos heard the sound that changed everything, the deep rumble of approaching vehicles. But instead of the friendly sound of American engines, these were the distinctive notes of enemy pickup trucks mounting heavy weapons. "Shit," Williams breathed. "They're bringing up reinforcements." Santos looked at the 2 wounded men under her care, then at Williams with his own untreated head wound. They were trapped with no way out and enemy fighters closing in, but she hadn't come this far to give up. "Williams, can you still fight?" The corporal checked his rifle and nodded grimly. "I can hold them off for a while, but not forever." Santos grabbed Williams's radio and called Rodriguez in the helicopter. "Chief, we need you to draw some fire. Can you create a distraction?" "Roger that, Doc. I'll make some noise." The Black Hawk rose above the tree line and began engaging enemy positions with its door guns, drawing fire away from the trapped vehicle. Santos used the opportunity to organize their escape. "Williams, help me get Rodriguez on a stretcher. We're moving Morrison on a backboard." Working together despite the chaos around them, they carefully extracted both wounded men from the vehicle. Santos coordinated their movement with Torres's squad, timing each dash between cover points to avoid enemy fire. The evacuation became a running battle across 200 meters of contested ground. Santos found herself moving between medical care and tactical decisions, directing Williams and the other soldiers while monitoring her patient's vital signs. When they finally reached the helicopter, Morrison had begun showing signs of improvement. His pupils were responding to light, and his breathing had stabilized. Rodriguez remained critical but alive, his lung functioning well enough to sustain him during the flight to the forward surgical team. As the Black Hawk lifted off with its cargo of wounded soldiers, Santos looked down at the ambush site where Torres and the remaining soldiers continued to hold their defensive positions. The quick reaction force would arrive within minutes, but her mission was complete. During the flight back to base, Morrison briefly regained consciousness. His eyes focused on Santos with confusion and then recognition. "Santos?" he whispered through the oxygen mask. "Yes, sir. Just rest. You're going to be fine." Morrison's hand found hers and squeezed weakly. "I was wrong," he said, barely audible over the helicopter noise. "You belong here." 2 weeks later, Morrison returned to duty with a permanent scar above his right ear and a new perspective on leadership. Rodriguez recovered fully and returned to active duty after a month of rehabilitation. Williams received a Purple Heart for his wounds and continued serving as Morrison's communications specialist. Santos never spoke about her actions that day, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But word spread quickly through the base about the medic who had flown alone into an ambush to save her fellow soldiers. Commander Morrison called her into his office on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the incident. This time, his greeting was different. "Staff Sergeant Santos, please have a seat." She sat across from his desk, noticing how his entire demeanor had changed. The skepticism and coldness were gone, replaced by genuine respect. "I owe you an apology," Morrison began. "When you arrived, I judged you based on my own preconceptions rather than your qualifications and character. That was wrong of me." Santos remained quiet, letting him continue. "What you did out there wasn't just medically excellent. It was leadership under fire. You made decisions that saved lives, including mine. You've earned the respect of every soldier in this unit." Morrison stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for proving me wrong, and thank you for bringing my boys home." Santos shook his hand firmly. "That's what we do for each other, sir. We bring everyone home." From that day forward, Santos was never again seen as an outsider trying to prove herself. She had become an integral part of Bravo Company, trusted and respected by every soldier under Morrison's command. Her actions had demonstrated that courage and competence had nothing to do with gender or size, but everything to do with character and commitment. The mission at Nad Ali became legendary within the unit, not just for the successful rescue, but for the way it transformed their understanding of what it meant to belong. Santos had shown them that belonging wasn't about fitting in. It was about standing up when it mattered most. Morrison learned that day that true leadership meant recognizing excellence regardless of where it came from, and that the best soldiers were often the ones who proved themselves not through words, but through actions when everything was on the line. For Santos, the mission confirmed what she had always known, that her place was wherever soldiers needed medical care, regardless of the danger or the doubts of others. She had found her home among warriors, not because she had changed to fit their world, but because she had shown them what their world could become when they opened it to excellence in all its forms.